Hey, back to our Pulse starter template part 4 and hopefully the last part. Um, Actually, I'm recording this for the second time. So I started recording this a while ago, and in the end, I found a Coda bug which threw me off a bit. And at that point, I just got confused and I scrapped that video altogether. So I'm recording this part for once again. I rolled back the doc, and by rolled back I mean I created a copy from the doc history to get it back to the state where we left off in part 3. Also, as you can see, I have a haircut, which means that I finally got recovered from COVID and went out, got a haircut, and hopefully in a day or two there will be more videos from me. So yeah, without further ado, I have something like 30 or 40 minutes left. So let's do the final changes to this doc. Okay, let's look into what we have in our doc size, and it doesn't look as good as 40 out of 50 objects used already, 21 pages, 15 table and views. I know I'm going a bit overboard, overkill with pages. So as I said, um, if you're serious, if you're just using Coda casually for, I don't know, a few tables here and there, a few pages, maybe a wiki or whatever, then you don't really have to do this structure, this doc architecture, doc structure in the first place. But if you're serious about Coda, if you're building a doc to last, then this shouldn't be a problem for you, because most likely you're already on a pro or on a team account. So but still, I figured we don't really need separate pages. Okay, the DB templates, will you ever reference it by the table name? No, you won't. Constants, will you ever reference it by the table name? No, you won't. You will use the constants named functions. So no, really, it's one case where there's no really a need to keep 2 pages. You can just call this utils dbcon templates constants, for instance, and make it a single page to just combine these things together. So that's one thing. The db constants and db templates, you keep them together. Another thing that I remembered every doc should have is a low resolution timer. So here's the thing. I posted this already in a community. Again, let me find this. Replace now with a lower resolution real-time clock. Yeah, so that's the thing that almost every starter doc will need. The thing is, there's only 2 formulas about time. There's the today formula that updates once a day and gives you the current date. And yeah, it's a volatile formula, and by now you remember what volatile formulas are. These are the formulas that are calculated in your browser, so it's only calculated once when you open the doc, and the next time it's calculated when the date changes. So it's the today date for now, today formula for you. And also there's a now formula which updates every time. So if you make it a named formula, you'll see this in a doc map debug calculations. You'll see that this formula updates 3, 4, yeah, no, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. So it updates every second, maybe sometimes a few times a second, or once in a few seconds it will trigger it here. But this formula updates like once in a second, basically. On itself, it's not a problem. It becomes a problem when, let's say, you have a table of tasks, and let's say in a table of tasks you have something like due by, and it's not a due on, not a date, but you need to compare something against a specific time. For instance, you have some task that is sorry, that is due by, and let's make it a formula, whatever. Let's maybe call it something like today, just to make some random plus random, and that's gonna add just random date, random amount of minutes and hours and whatever. And let's say you want to show this due by here, and you want to set either a filter or a conditional format to due by is less than now, right? And you want to show these rows as perhaps some okay, so it's actually it's hard to not run into that because it's almost end of the day here. So let's say hours, 12 hours, and now about half a row, half the rows should be in the past and another half in the future. Yeah, so now it's the random nature of this column. So yeah, but if we now look into the doc, into debug calculations, what you'll see is that the conditional format gets recalculated every second. And okay, it's a small table now, right? So it only takes something like 5 milliseconds for each run through the table to compare the due by versus the now. But imagine if what happens if we have not 50 but 5,000 rows. It's gonna take 100 milliseconds now every second. It's gonna take 10% of your time to recalculate just the conditional format, and it's not like anything changes this second, right? So there's no need really, and it's not like you're gonna set minutes by 8:49 or 8:36, but okay, even if you do, you don't need to recheck that each second, and Coda doesn't give you that, doesn't give you the function to only check it each minute, but you can to have a timer that only updates each minute, not each second. But luckily you can construct that, and that's what I'm usually doing in my docs. So I'm creating a formula named, let's say, now minute, and I'm naming it starting with a now, so that every time you want to type now, it suggests you now minute instead. So instead of the now function, it suggests you now minute. So that's the reason behind this naming. So let me just add that now minute. And what else I do is there's a very handy function, date time truncate, and I can select this to truncate down to a minute. Actually, you can also truncate down to an hour, but it's not granular enough. Imagine that you have a task that's due on 11:30, then you won't have that rechecked, recalculated until a new hour starts. So second is too granular, minute, hour is perhaps not granular enough. Minute is just right. So I'm using now minute, and now the time is truncated to the minute. It's not rounded up, it's rounded down. So if it's 11:47 59, it's gonna round down to 11:47, and only when 11:48:00 strikes, that's when it becomes 11:48. And now you go and now you set all your filters and all your conditional formats not on the now function, but on the now minute function. You're comparing to the now minute, and see what happens. I clear, I start measuring, and what happens now is that your now minute formula, okay, it doesn't show in here now, but your now minute formula is gonna change perhaps once every second. So Coda will change the now value every second, so now minute will get refreshed pretty often. Okay, perhaps if I'm looking at it, it's gonna recalculate it more often. Yeah, now we are looking at the page, it's gonna be recalculated more often. So 7th time, 8th time right now, it's gonna be recalculated. So its value is recalculated often, but it takes only 1 millisecond to recalculate this formula. What's important is that as long as its result doesn't change, the value of this named function, named formula doesn't change, it doesn't trigger cascaded recalculations. So only when now minute changes, when it becomes 11:50, which gonna happen like in 20 seconds, you will see that the conditional format for the table of tasks, only then it will refresh. So 10 seconds from now, let's wait for it. So it's only gonna take once in a minute to do this. Yeah, oh, nah, okay, now it happens. So it's 23:50, a new minute started, and now, only now, it recalculated the now minute 21 times so far, but it only recalculated the conditional format 2 times so far. And that's how you make your calculations easier, by having that lower resolution timer. And you can, if you want to be more creative, you can make this formula more complicated to only round down to each 5 minutes. That might be handy if you actually have huge tables that you're but again, if you have that problem with running every minute the conditional formats or filters, then perhaps you have a bigger problem with your doc, and that's the least of your problems, the granularity of that timer. But yeah, so that's one thing to keep in your starter template for sure. Yeah, we have the due by it. Right now it's random. That's not what we need. So, but still, let's keep in our tasks table, let's keep our due by, because we'll need it later. How do we need it? So we want to have our tasks, we want to have our is done, is not done status, right? The problem with that is even if you set something like modified by, you don't really have, whether it's checked done or not done, you don't really have enough visibility into what your, who marked the task done, or very often you want to do some extra actions when you take action on some record, something like bringing a task through a workflow or bringing a project through a workflow. I had this with a recent client now. You want to not just mark a checkbox done or not done, but you also want to do some extra logic when that happens. And what is common for regular Coda users to do is to set up automation to react on, okay, is done status is changed, we run some automation on that. So they would add automation on that. The problem with automation is that first, it doesn't run immediately. It may run after an indefinite delay. It may be 5 minutes, it may be a matter of seconds, it may be a matter of minutes, and that ultimately depends on your doc size. So if a doc is huge, then automations may be deferred for like another 10 or 15 minutes to run. Another thing is that when automation runs, it doesn't necessarily pick the change that triggered that automation. If you set an automation to run on the change to a value here, what happens is that you're only ensure that an automation will run for each change. So if there's been 2 changes, an automation will be run 2 times. But there's no guarantee that when automation will run, it will pick that state of the doc that triggered that automation. In simpler terms, if you check this checkbox done and then check it undone, and you have automation set up on it, what you'll see, and let's actually build that, because that's what we're gonna build. So what I'm gonna build next is I'm gonna add a log table and log, probably a log page and a sub page, db log, so event log, and that's gonna be something, a table where we want to know who checked what. So let's say we will be adding log messages. And tracking time when this or that person changed the done or not done status. Why we want that in the first place? You'd say we already have our activity here. So poll updated done true, done false, done true, done false. Let's see what happens here. So we have our activity. Well, first off, you don't see every change in this activity. So it only saved this to the snapshot once, perhaps. Maybe you'll see this in a moment. Maybe when this gets saved to the server, you'll see more here. But first off, this activity is not surfaced anywhere, so you cannot really build charts on that. You cannot really keep track of how many tasks were done, who checked off the tasks, whatever. So you want to keep if you want to use this information on what changed in your system, use this for charts or for reporting, for logging, for whatever. You need to manually track the changes. You need to manually log this somewhere. So yeah, that's why you want to have a table of log entries. And along with the log entries, perhaps there's a few things that you want to log. So it's also makes sense if we are still within the limit. It makes sense to also have a table of log entry types. By the way, while we're added assigned filter options, I wanted to rename it to something because it's not really options. It's, or did I? So yeah, assigned filter choices, I guess. Assigned to choices. Something like that. So it's perhaps a better name. I don't remember how I used to name it the last time I recorded this this specific part. Okay, back to log entry times. Again, I'm making a new table. Log entry types. It's a simple table with just one column, and it's gonna be actually all log entries are of one type now. So a user. We have type, and it also makes sense to put a message here. So instead of putting it on the DB templates, it makes sense to, if you have DB log entry types and DB log entries, let's make it a regular table icon. So let it be a message, let it be a timestamp, and we can use the function of added row here, or actually we can put it when we are logging an item because maybe we want to change that. We may keep a record of, we may put here a record of what we're object, and we may also put an actual user who did the change. And this is one of the places where we actually want to use the people column. We don't want to notify when added, whatever. We turn that off because we just want to keep track of who did this change. But that's the only way, that's the only reason where you would like to perhaps keep track of the actual user, because, well, we want to, why do we keep the log entries table? We want to catch instances where an admin did something wrong. So we know that, okay, we say Virginie or Jonathan moved task A to status done or not done or whatever, but we want to know if it's actually Jonathan who did that or it's an admin who took this malicious action. We can, again, go into the change history and see that, or into activity of each record. But if we are keeping this entry table, we maybe want to track the actual user. And while we're at it, we can also track the employee logged by employee. And object is going to be any object. Maybe we are keeping reference to the project that was created, to the task that was moved, whatever. So yeah, log entry types. Let's say we have a type, and here we have a message template. And as usual with the templates, we have, how do we call it here? Description or parameters or whatever. I'm gonna perhaps make a small jump cut or no. So project created, task, status changed. And the third one, I'll keep it up to you, or I'll just delete it because we don't need any rows hanging in our table. So employee created project, and we have employee, and we need to go into big cell mode, project name, and here move task to status changed task, status to status. So yeah, employee task name status. And yeah, the third one could have been task added. So it's an extra task added. So again, employee added task to project. So that's our three log entry types. And in the message here, we also want to kind of maybe keep the entry type. And in a way, we can generate message with a formula, but we shouldn't. We should stamp it, and we should stamp the timestamp and the object and the employee and the actual user. So nothing in this table should really be a formula. This is going to be a table that we ideally can then clean up of any old entries. Yeah, nothing really here should be a formula. It should keep. So we are stamping changes, right? So that's the place where we are stamping every change in our doc. Okay, we are getting close to our doc size usage, which is kinda okay. We're still gonna keep it under the limit, I guess. All right. Let's have our due by actually generated. Let's have it generated. How do we generate values here? So we can make a button to modify rows and generate values here, and that's actually one of the things that I'm gonna show you. So very often I'm just making a button that's ironically called click me, even though it's not meant to be clicked more than once. And I'm writing my action here. So db tasks, formula map, like this row, not this row, but current value modify rows. And that's how I call modify rows on each row individually. If I just do db tasks modify rows, whatever I type in here, it's applied. You cannot apply. So one value is calculated. So let's say I say due by, and let's say it's today plus hours 12 plus random plus, let's say it's gonna be minutes random multiplied by how many minutes are there in the 24 hours by 60 minutes, and that thing rounded to 5 minutes. So round 2, we can round this to 5 minutes. So if I do this now, if I click this, it's only gonna calculate this once, the today plus hours plus random plus whatever due by, and what it's gonna do, it's gonna update each row to the same value. So that's what modify row on a collection of rows does. It updates them all with the same value. So the right way to do this row by row is to run db tasks formula map, and now current value modify rows. So we take each row individually and we modify it with generated value. And let me just clean this up now. And what's gonna happen here? What's gonna happen here is again it set the same value to all rows, and that's exactly the thing why I stopped my previous recording, my previous take of this part. And that's one of the things that I was delusional about for all the 2 years that I've been working with Coda. So there's the thing that Jason from Coda Engineering told me. Maybe it's a recent change, and that's one of the that's actually, if you remember me recording how I or maybe I never made it public, how I made the poker game, or how I made that random quotes, random good fortunes generator. I was running into this very issue. So here's the thing. If I add run actions to it, I always thought that I only needed run actions if I was going to like write one action, then perhaps a comma, then another action. If I was going to do that, only then I needed run actions. Turns out, if I wrap an action into run actions, or I put multiple actions into run actions, or just one action, I put it within run actions. So I make this small change. I type in run actions around my modify rows thing. It's gonna wait. So what it did now, it submitted all the changes in parallel, and the nature of random function in Coda is that it only gives you a different value when there's been an edit to the doc. So if there has been no edits to the doc, it doesn't change its value. So the seed doesn't change. It's a pseudo-random. In Coda, it depends on the timestamp of the last change in the doc or some sort of a value. So it's only recalculated in short terms. It's only recalculated when there is a change in the doc. And by not using run actions, we are basically telling Coda, modify these 50 rows or 49 rows or whatever, and only then recalculate the doc. And by using run actions around our actions, we are telling Coda, run this action, like the modify rows, and recalculate the doc. Make sure that the doc is recalculated before the action is run or after the action is run. And since this is in a formula map, how it's gonna behave is that for 49 times, it's gonna modify rows, recalculate the doc. Modify rows, recalculate the doc. Here's the change, and here's how it's gonna look now. I click the button and the values are gonna appear one by one here, and they are gonna be different. Yeah, well, more or less different, right? So this is the crucial thing why you still need to use run actions around, why you still may need to use run actions around the around the even if you're just wrapping one action there. So it's very important. I just learned it now. Maybe it's a recent change because I remember never having problems with it. I never used run actions in a scenario like this. Formula map, modify rows, fine. Again, again, you don't need this if you are not using random, or if you're not dependent on doc changes. So if you just need to modify all rows and perhaps, I don't know, stamp a value or set assigned to a specific person, and you don't need the doc to recalculate between these changes, don't use run actions. It will be much faster. It will not wait for the doc to recalculate. But in this case, in the random form function case, we had to wait for the doc to recalculate. But normally you just want to, maybe, I don't know, update 50 projects, update 7 rows, then you don't need to use run action. Don't use run actions. Then it will execute all these 7 changes like in parallel without waiting for the doc to recalculate. It's gonna be ultra fast. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another trick so that I wanted to show you while I'm here. So you could use this, you could use a button for that. Another trick, and now I'm not even sure if that's gonna work as expected. So another trick, okay, let me delete this. Another trick is you don't want to make a button. You can have it like that. So you can have this formula here. You can set the value for new rows. You can set this formula in a value for new rows, right? I mean only this part. Today plus hours 12 plus minutes 2, and I guess it's already today, so I think it's maybe today minus it's already a new day, so yeah, minus day 1, etc. And I can click apply to blank rows, and that's doing basically the same, but without coding the button, without coding the formula map, without doing this externally. So you have, if there you have to use current value to reference the row, here you can use this row to reference this row if you're gonna populate these values with something dependent on this row. What you need to do though after you've done that, so first thing is you need to make sure, for instance, if you want to mark all these things as value for new rows as true, you don't have this applied to blank values. What you need to do is you need to actually select the whole column by clicking on the first one, scrolling to the bottom, holding shift, clicking on the last one. That's how you select the whole column, and then you press delete to delete the values, and only in that case you'll see the apply to this many blank rows if you have blank rows. So that's how you update this value. By the way, if you didn't know, the checkbox value has actually 3 states. It's checked, unchecked, and blank. Deleted one, it's grayed out. So if you press delete, it's not the same as being unchecked, and it behaves differently. So if you, yeah, it's different, it behaves differently. It probably, if you use is done is blank, it's gonna be false. Here it's gonna be true, right? So it's a blank or not blank. If you compare that to false, if you make it blank, it's not gonna say that it's false. So it's not gonna compare properly to false. So that's one thing to also keep in mind, that you have these 3 states. And if you are, yeah, you have these 3 states. You have true, false, and blank value. So that's to keep in mind. Usually when you have a new checkbox column, it pre-populates all rows with the either false or true. But if you're using a formula to calculate its values, or if you're inserting with an action, you may run into situations where you see a mixture of blank values and false values. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Blank doesn't equal false, or blank doesn't equal 12 p.m. a.m. or blank doesn't, yeah, blank equals a blank, blank doesn't equal 0. Blank equals a blank text though, or blank selection. Okay, we have our due by, and let's, yeah, we have that. Not sure though, it's 22nd, why everything's in the past now. So our random returns from 0 to 1. We multiply that by 24 hours, and we multiply that by 60 minutes. We should well, we should, and we round that to 5, so we should be generating this properly. Not sure why. Oh, days 1. Was I saying day 1? Yeah, days 1. I'm mixing these two because day 1 is what it's doing. It's taking a calendar date of, okay, I'm gonna talk more about this on the Coda Formula Fundamentals course, about the data types. Short answer, numbers are basically dates, and dates are basically numbers, and 1 is a date on the 1st or something of January 1900, and that's how dates are calculated. So yeah, it's very important not to mix up day and days. So if you want to say -1 day, it's actually -1 days. Yeah, and I need to regenerate this column now. Yeah, deleted all the column, apply to 49 rows, and don't forget to go and delete the formula, so that next time you're adding new rows, you actually have a chance to populate them yourself. Because you only needed this formula to populate cells with value with random numbers. So you have either ways of doing this. You either do this like that, or you do this with an extra button that you also don't forget to delete. Okay. And now that we have our due by, we can again have our conditional format, or not have a conditional format. So the thing with conditional format is that it takes up quite some space in the dock. It's still not super performant. So instead of using conditional format, what I like using is colored pills, colored lookups. And for that, let's have another table, db task statuses. And it's a small table, again, with just one column. It's gonna be, let's say it's gonna be scheduled and overdue. And let's keep the third row because we'll need it in a minute. And overdue, we're gonna make it red like this, or we can use conditional formatting, doesn't matter. We can have multiple ways of setting up formatting on these pills. So we have, let's say, schedule, let's make it blue, and text is just regular black text, and overdue is red. And what I'll do now on the DB tasks, I'll make a new column, the lookup on task statuses. and I'm gonna calculate this with a formula. If due by less than now minute, then it's overdue, otherwise it's scheduled. And we have our colorful status, we have it set here in apply styling, and now in our my tasks we just surface the status somewhere, and what we do, we remove the conditional format, and we can also the scheduled one, we don't need it to be so bright, so we just go and perhaps update it maybe to a gray one with a gray text. So now we see that this is overdue, this is scheduled, or we may make it even less prominent. We remove the gray background. Yeah, schedule and overdue. Or if we want to make it actually brighter, I mean the red one. If we want to make it brighter, we can remove this kind of styling and we can add a rule here on status contain. I don't like to use the status contains. I use this row equals overdue to match the actual row. And let's make it apply to all columns and make it a bright red. And this is your bright red, overdue, schedule, schedule, overdue, overdue. Yeah, so that's what I'm using instead of conditional format. Yeah, assign to, and it's done. Okay, so we've done that. The status is overdue or scheduled. Now, what I was saying in the beginning is done. First, yeah, we wanted to look into logging, right? So I jumped away from that. I kind of forgot that we were doing some logging. Let's do this. Let's set up an automation just to test the hypothesis. So log is done, change on task. When row changes, table is db tasks, and column is done, then we do the following. And I always like, as I said, I like setting these up with formulas. db log entries, add row, and I can now spend all the time I want on printing this formula, making it a nicely formatted one. It's gonna, when I close it and open again, it's gonna collapse all the formatting that I've done. So that's one of the reasons why I hate typing in formulas in the automation editor, and I actually don't use automations that often, but I'd rather put the logic in a button and click that button. The only thing is that we cannot really do that if we need our reference to step 1 result, step 2 result, etc. So okay, add row. Entry type is gonna be task status changed. Timestamp is gonna be now. Object is gonna be step 1 result, which is the row. We're capturing the row that triggered the change so that we can link back to it later. What else? Employee is gonna be, well, we cannot put current, so that's our first problem. We cannot put current employee here because it's not gonna be evaluated by automation, so we are keeping it blank. Actual user, we cannot actually put a user there as well because yeah, we cannot put the user there as well because in automation context there is no user. The user is a synthetic user called automation bot, and the user function returns nothing. so we don't have our user information there either. But maybe step 1 result is done modified by, maybe we have that. Let's try that out. And finally, the message, we're gonna take our task status changed message template, and actually we're gonna use there's a bug in code that you cannot just type format and start supplying text, start supplying arguments to it. You have to, it's perhaps one of the only function where you have to actually use it in a functional way. So far I've logged this issue, but it's not high priority, I guess. So in this template, what do we fill this template with? Let me maybe remember quickly. So we have an employee, right? Again, someone changed the status of task, step 1 result. Task to step 1 result is done. If is done, then the status is done. Otherwise, the status is not done. So here everything's correct, right? So if the step 1 result is done, then we should log that the status was changed to done, and then the status was changed back to not done. And I'm gonna just copy this for later reuse. And let's turn on our automation. And here's another thing that you may or may not know, is that when you test the rule, even if you say take actions as automation bot or whoever, if you test the rule, it's gonna calculate it in the browser, not on the server. And many of the things are gonna actually work. So if you look into log entries, did it add a new row? It didn't, so interesting why it didn't do that. Let's try it again. Oh, modified by expects whatever, but found value, yeah, we cannot modify it by, we cannot really. Okay, this is the row, and what if I supply modified by, I give step 1 result is done. Maybe in a functional way it's gonna work. No, it doesn't. It used to work, so it's but again, I'm not gonna wager a lot on that. Maybe it doesn't work, in fact. Okay. Exception occurred. Why is that? Entry type, task status change, timestamp. Now, object, step 1 result. Maybe that's what created a problem. Actual user, whatever, let's omit that. Message, we log the message. Yeah, perhaps something with those modified by, modified. Yeah. By the way, if I add the actual user, so actual user, I set the user variable here, and I run the test. Yeah, it added the actual user here. So the user function works if I'm testing this on the browser level, and timestamp would work fine. But what if we now set this rule to work? But these were our manual steps, right? So these were testing the rule, and testing the rule always happens in the browser. So let's now go to our tasks and change it to done, and now change it back to not done pretty fast. Let's see what happens. It triggered automation twice, quite fast. It triggered the automation twice. Let's see what we have in our log, and there you have it. Someone changed task figure out priority status to not done, and someone changed task status to not done. If I go change it to is done, and we now wait for the automation to run, it's gonna add a row now then when the server reacts to that trigger. Let's wait for the server to react to that trigger. Will it react to that trigger? It should react to that trigger, right? Maybe there's, yeah. So here, someone changed task status to done. So our formula is correct, right? So why do we have not done, not done? And that's what I was talking about. The automation triggers on a row change, and it receives that row that triggered automation run as step 1 result. But it doesn't look into what was historically there when the automation was triggered, what exactly triggered the automation. It looks at the row at the moment when the automation runs. So when we mark this not done and then we mark it done again, the next time automation runs, it's gonna look at the snapshot where it only sees that is done is set to true. It doesn't know that the is done was not set to true because it doesn't catch that time. So we see status to done, status to done. And that's the problem with trying to log changes using automation. So that's why you should not use automation to log changes. And that's something that you need to do manually. And the only way to do this manually is to use buttons, because the only place where you can write arbitrary code that's executed as soon as you're taking an action is by using a button. So let's do that. Let's add a button to our tasks table. It's gonna be a button. We're gonna give this column, that's something that I like doing. I like giving that column, that's gonna be a column that basically replaces a checkbox. I have this check emoji. I'm naming a column like that because I can. I have a label, and our label is gonna depend on the status of the task. Is done, then the label is gonna include an emoji of white check mark. And if it's not done, then it's gonna be white large square. So these are of the same size. Actually, this looked nicer when you had square buttons, when they changed the design to be this, to have this rounded borders. It stopped being as nice. Now the buttons are wider, but okay, we've got what we've got, right? I wish we could have, so why we're doing this like that, and generally I cannot really make dynamic buttons unless I'm using a hidden function, and as I said, it's a formula that one should not really use in production docs. The what is that? Yeah, whatever. Yeah, I was saying, and I hope that audio is fine in this video. I hope I won't re-record that. So I was saying, we can have our label set dynamically with a formula. Unfortunately, we cannot have this with color, and we cannot have this with icon. I hope that time comes when we can set an icon programmatically and we can set color programmatically. We can do this with an unsupported button formula, but it's very risky to use a button formula. You can do this if you know what you're doing. You can use a button formula. It's very bad on the dock size because it inflates. You still need to have a button which takes up quite some space in the dock, and then you need to have a button that wraps that button, and it takes twice as much the size of that button alone. So you basically add a lot of overhead to your dock by using the button hidden formula. But sometimes you need to have these trade-offs if you really want to have if you absolutely need to have these different colors on a button and different icons, you cannot do this otherwise. But what you can do, you can simulate this with just keeping all your buttons white and using emoji and different labels for your buttons. You can just use, yeah, let's say, let's have some action here, because we want to see we want to see the button active, right? So you can use colorful emoji, you can use colorful text, and you might have guessed already that you can keep this text in your here, right? So what we've done already in our add new project here. So we have an emoji, we have a button, we have a text, and we can have this text colored, and this will add some color to your buttons. So the button will still be white, but the text on it will be green. It will give you some color coding, nice on the eye, some eye candy. So that's something that will work for you. Okay, we're back to my tasks interface, right? So yeah, this was unnecessary. This is just, we are just replicating a checkbox. And in the simplest case, what we do is we do this row, modify rows is done equals to this row is done not. So that's our button that updates the is done status, and we may want to disable it under some conditions. So that's one way to make it disabled. So let's say if current flow, current employee is blank, then we don't let a person who is not added to the doc, we don't let them click. So if let's say there's no flow for me, there's no user, like greetings guest, click here to start using the doc, the buttons are disabled. I cannot change the status of anything. And of course, I'll hide the is done, right? So I'll hide the is done checkbox from the site, and I'll prompt our users to click on the buttons here. So yeah, click here to start using the doc. I add myself, show tasks for everyone. I can also prevent or assigned to is not me. So this way we only allow our user to click to change the status of the tasks that were specifically assigned to this person. So that's, or assigned to my team, for instance, or assigned not to current employee, and assigned to team responsible is not the one from current flow, current employee, teams. So yeah, now I can change tasks for my team engineering and the ones that were assigned specifically to me, but not the tasks assigned to someone else or some other team. So let's see, I can, yeah, all my team's tasks, I can change them. Just me, I can change them, but everyone, I cannot change status of the tasks by everyone. So that's the benefit of using a button instead of just a checkbox. You have more control on whether it's clickable or not. And now that we have this, we can add our logging to this. So run actions. We need to have multiple actions. We modify the status of is done, is not done. And we do, yeah, I don't have that copied anymore, so I have to type this again. db log entries, add row, entry type is task status changed, timestamp is now. What else? Object is this row. Actual user is user. Employee is current flow, current employee. What else? Message is format. Task status changed. Message template. The first one is current flow, current employee name. Second one is this row task. And the third one is what's our new status if is done, then marked done, not done. And another thing that I'm also doing, show alert only for errors, because no need for anyone to see that this many rows were created, this many rows were deleted. So yeah, I start marking our tasks as done and not done, and that's how we have our Jonathan changed task status to done, to not done, to done. Yeah, status of task. Okay, we could have a better message there. Maybe we, yeah. So create a project, changed status of task, that to done. And it didn't recalculate our messages here, but again, if you want that so badly, you can reconstruct these messages by having our object. And again, we can put whatever here. It's just so that we keep record. Maybe we want to delete the record. Oh yeah, the actual user is actually inserted, the user, the automation bot here. But yeah, we couldn't have a handle of whoever actually did that change. So yeah, these 5 rows are absolute trash and don't carry any significance. So again, yeah, we have our setup. One last thing that's not nice is that we have this scheduled and overdue status, and we want to actually have the overdue status only if it's not done, right? And we want to have also the status of scheduled, perhaps overdue and done, or not done, to do, done, and only show overdue status if the task is actually overdue. So let's do that. We have our task statuses. We'll have our scheduled renamed to to-do. And we'll have done. And again, that's gonna be not as bright as the overdue one. Let's update our formula here to a switch if is done, then the status is done. If due by, otherwise it's not done. So we are checking for the rest of conditions. Due by is in the past, then it's overdue. Otherwise it's a regular to-do task. Okay, we can make it more, actually we can make it more, we can copy this rule, replace it to green, and replace the formula this row equals done. Yeah, so here's our to do, overdue, and done. So here's done, and our overdue task is finally done. And We sorta can also, if it's important to remember when it was done, we can also have a datetime done at, and we modify our rows. If it's done, then we change the status to done, or we can get rid of the is done. We can get rid of the is done altogether and use the done at. If it's blank, then it's not done. If it's not blank, then it's or we can have a third status that redo, which says last marked done as. So let's do the third status, last marked done at. We can have it as a separate action here, actually, if, and that's another chance to show you the conditional logic of actions. If this row is done, then we want to this row modify rows last mark done at to now. But we need to have the second thing. What happens if the row is not done? And in that case, we need to do nothing. And the action for nothing is no op, which is short for no operation. So this way we have our if with the three clauses. So first is a condition. If it's done, we're gonna modify rows set last mark done at to the current timestamp to now. And if it's not done, and remember that it's updated in the previous step. So here we're updating. We could combine this in a way, in a different way, but we broke it down into separate digestible steps. So one step is to swap the value of done from true to false, from false to true. And the next step is to, based on the now, the value that we have now on this checkbox, either modify the last mark done at, or, so let's see what happens. To do mark done, we modify it last mark done at, but we unset it and it goes, it doesn't change. So no action is taken there. No op stands for no operation. And then I check it again, and I check it back, and I wait for another, I don't know, a few seconds, or I show here the seconds, and I check it again, and I updated the seconds here, and updated the seconds, and again, status is not done. And let's add our status on reopened and make it a yellow one. Again, conditional format, because we want to make it bright. Duplicate yellow. This row is reopened. Switch if is done. Done. If it's not done, last mark done at is not blank, then the status is reopened. So yeah, done, reopened. Now to do, done, reopened, done, whatever. Overdue, done, reopened, done, reopened. So that's our logic. We could make our formula here different, so that it's important then if it's reopened but it's overdue, that overdue takes precedence over the reopened status. We control that by changing the code in our switch if, because how this works is that it evaluates first condition is done. If it's true, then it returns done and doesn't evaluate the next ones. But if it's not done, then it checks for the next condition. And the next condition, if it's overdue, then it returns overdue, and only if it's not overdue, it's gonna check whether the last markdown is not blank. But by repositioning these things, it's gonna first check if it's not blank, and then if it's reopened, it's never gonna check for overdue at all. It's reopened, so the status is reopened. No need to check further. So that's how you overdue done, reopened. So it's not going to become overdue again. So that's also an important thing to know. Yeah. Let's mark these done. Yeah, whatever. So yeah, let's have it something like this, a colorful one. Okay, it's been a while, and I still want to add a few things to this doc, and I'm probably gonna record a separate part on that, because that's gonna be mostly beautification. I want to so I don't like this new row. You see that it gets filtered out, so we need to sort that out. We don't want that. We don't want people to be adding rows using the plus new row here. So I'm gonna add a button to add yourself a task. Remember, in the first video we talked about this. We don't want this state where we have empty rows here in our table. So by clicking plus, we kind of generate these empty invalid rows, and we don't want to have them in our system, so we want to prevent that. Another thing that I want to explore is try to group projects and make the group on either status or on the project, and make it so that the group, so that you can actually select the grouping here, you won't have to go into table settings to change your grouping or sorting, but surface these controls here. I also had a trick on that. Sort group table with external controls. It's one of the older tricks, one of my first tricks that I've published in the community, so that instead of forcing people to go into table settings, you're surfacing controls to group dynamically or sort, group by nothing, sort by price, either ascending or descending. So that's I think I've updated that trick with user-specific controls at some point, but yeah, I want to bring that into our starter template. Also, maybe do this zebra coloring, because this looks nice, right? If you have these striped table, why not? And yeah, that's something for the part 5, which hopefully is gonna be shorter than these. Yeah, I'm running on the brink of our limits. I'm running very close to our limits. So, but again, this is a solid doc, and most of the things that I'm explaining here are actually very useful to keep. So, yeah. We have to use these 3 remaining objects very mindfully. I wanted to have a button here too. So yeah, I'll need 2 buttons still. I'll need 2 buttons to add a task, to reset the filters, and that's perhaps when I'll stop. Maybe I'll have one more table somewhere, or maybe I'll have one more helper, and that's gonna be our 50 objects. And that's where I will stop. Okay, see you in part 5. Cheers.